Today we have one of the premier brand marketers in the world, Robert Zajac. He has spent time in an executive role at Nike, ESPN. He helped oversee LeBron and Kobe's shoe lines and is now the SVP of Global Marketing and Experience at Hollister, where he also oversees the Gilly Hicks brand, as well as Charli and Dixie D'Amelio's new clothing line, Social Tourist. I learned a ton today about storytelling and brand building, and I think you're going to enjoy it too. Remember, if you enjoyed the show, be a friend, tell a friend, and subscribe. Enjoy the show, guys.
Influencers, inspiration, and Instagram. This is Earned by Tribe Dynamics. Here's Conor Begley.
Welcome to the show, Robert. Thanks so much for taking out the time today.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's very exciting.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. Whenever I interview a guest, the thing that I've found, like everybody has a superpower in the world, right? Something that they just know better than everybody else. And as I kind of dove into your background, I think that specifically your expertise in marketing brands that are connected to individuals, right? As well as this kind of broad understanding of brand marketing, storytelling, and then really sports marketing very specifically. You had a long career in that as well. Is something I'm just fascinated by. I have like so many questions about this kind of area of marketing because honestly, you're the first guest. Well, I shouldn't say that. I interviewed Steve,
Yep.
But other than Steve, the first guest I've really gotten to ask questions about this. And I think you have the basketball side, which is quite different than what he focused on. So before we get into those elements, right? So this kind of the sports marketing and brand storytelling, today you are the global SVP of brand marketing and experience for the Hollister brand at Abercrombie and Fitch. As well as Gilly Hicks and Social Tourist, which are two kind of really cool up and coming brands that we'll get to talk about. But when I looked at that, I saw that you joined in May of 2020, which is like a pretty bold move, making like a career change, right? It's like the whole world is changing. So I'd love to hear kind of what the motivation was, what excited you about the opportunity, one, and then second would be, what the last year and a half has been like. Because obviously Hollister is the big brand within those three. Right. And a big part of their, I think, footprint and the way that they gain awareness is through foot traffic and in-person experiences. So how have you guys pivoted a brand that was kind of very much built off of in-house or in-person experiences to a brand that, is doing well kind of in a new era, new time period?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it certainly has been different. And I think, it's been different because of the way that you set up the question, the making that move right at the beginning of really the beginning of a global pandemic. So I joined really just after everyone got kicked off of the Abercrombie campus. COVID shook the world and really started to shut down retail everywhere, right? Starting to shut down retail across all different brands, across all different countries. I'll be honest, it made for a pretty wild transition. And I think the first big part of it was, I was working with a team that I'd never met in person. So I'd had a chance to meet with key counterparts and people across the organization, but my team, the people that, matter the most to me now, I'd never actually gotten a chance to meet with. So before I started, I had a chance to meet with them after they'd announced that I was moving into this role. And my first 18 months were all virtual. And I never actually set foot on campus until just this past summer. So just that, I think it's, I keep saying over and over again, I'm so fascinated by the fact we're living like probably one of the most interesting business case studies that's going to be written over the course of decades. Anyone who's
absolutely,
right? And anyone who's working in this environment, who's leading teams in this environment, who's managing through. And I don't think anybody really has been able to avoid it, right? Disruptions in business cycles, in transportation, in freight, in retail. So that was really the first 18 months of the role was building up that rapport with the team, a lot of teams meetings. And it's almost a double whammy. It was trying to become a member of this great team, but also trying to navigate through a retail landscape where like you said, all the stores were closing. A lot of the traffic was gone, and pivoting really big businesses into a digital direction almost overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So
And what were some of the things from a digital perspective that you think were, that worked really well, right? Because again, you've got to you've got to build awareness in a totally different way than the brand has historically, right?
yeah, I think the first big part was I have to say, like, the organization from a strategic leadership point of view was already very much in that space of evolving for the future, building a digital transformation across every part of the organization, right? Whether that's across the marketing teams, from an infrastructure, UX, CX, and I think the honestly, the capacity and the ability of the team was second to none. Overnight, right? They came into campus one day, the next day they were at home. They had to learn how to do all this work remotely. Then they had to learn how to deal with a new boss that they'd never met before. And then they had to pivot all their
Yeah.
plans, like building annual plans and seasonal plans. And they had to pivot all those, like reassign budgets, figure out where to put the resources, figure out how to adjust creative. There were campaigns in place that had already been conceptualized and for the most part built out, that were all about being together and enjoying each other's company. And I think a lot of that pivot was enabled by the fact that we're so focused on Gen Z. And that was a big change, right? Like, especially Hollister is, obsessively focused on Gen Z. And that means that our insights engines are all built around Gen Z, which means they're all inherently digital. So, things that might have set I think other brands, other organizations back, our set of brands already had an online research community that had over 1,500 Gen Z consumers in them. We were already talking to them digitally. We were already running digital focus groups. We were already gathering insights and running ideas by them. So a lot of the pivots and the plans were made easier by the fact that we were already set up from an insights perspective with this really powerful engine. And then I think the other big part of the pivot was Gen Z is inherently digital, right? It's kind of the most common and rote thing to say, but building plans to go where they already are, whether that's across a lot of the platforms that you talk about all the time, right? TikTok and Instagram, working more closely with Snap. So a lot of those pivots were already made a lot easier because that's where Gen Z naturally moved to when the world shut down.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny to think about one of the things that's really interesting for me is I worked at Abercrombie and Hollister when I was in high school, work was the first retail job I had.
Yeah.
And it's weird to think about kind of as a brand, that means that you're going through constant reinvention, right? Because if that's a consumer base that you're targeting and working with, it's not the same. I'm not there anymore, right? I don't buy Hollister anymore. That's not my not my age group. And so how do you and that age group moves really fast, right? That things change very, very quickly. So when you're talking about these kind of consumer insights, I think you'd mentioned in other interviews that kind of unearthing consumer insights was something that you learned, particularly during your first kind of 8 years or so on the advertising side. But talk to me about that group of 1,500 and talk to me about what are some of the ways that you figure that out, right? How do you stay cool? How do you stay relevant with an age group that graduates high school every 4 years?
Yeah,
right?
it's interesting. I think like you said, even taking it back a couple steps further, one of the things that's so interesting and why I love this industry so much, right, is you even going back to college, which is going way back, but the start of a lot of this kind of obsession with consumers, which is so important now, right? And I think I'd be lying if I said that my team and the people around me don't try and keep me young, which is I'm very thankful for. But even going back to college, I was an anthropology major, and at the end of the day, that idea of obsessing what makes people think, and obsessing not just what people think, but why they think that. And I think there's, that has kind of led to that's led to I don't know, the last 20 years of constantly being checking in on consumers. I think I'm still a big believer, as much as possible, of observing what people actually do. You know,
Not what they say, but what they actually do.
yeah. And so like right now we have, like I said, we have a couple of great things. We have this online community across the US and UK. We have a brand agent program, which is a high school kids all over the country that are actually part of our brand. And we use them a number of different ways. One is to always gathering insights, asking them questions, and they're kind of our eyes and ears on the ground in high schools specifically, right? So that's like right at that sweet spot of Gen Z, right in the middle.
Yep.
But yeah, I always kind of come back to this idea of like whenever possible to observe and making sure that we understand what's happening in real time with people, right? Whether that's market visits, store visits, being with consumers in their native environments. You mentioned going back to back in the day, but I remember one of the most interesting pieces, and again, like these kind of unlocks, right? These ahas for me. I don't know if hopefully they're interesting for other people. We had this client that didn't like any of the work we were doing. This is back when I was in advertising, and they were a packaged good. They were food packaged good, and they didn't like any of the work we were doing because it didn't work. So they liked the work, right? They liked the work, and they bought the work, and we made the work, and then it didn't work. And finally, we said, we're listening. We do all this focus groups. We do the study. We're testing the packaging. We're running ads by people. What is happening? And honestly, finally, we went to the grocery store, and it was low key, a little creepy. But like we just sat. we sat in the grocery store in the pasta sauce aisle for a half a day. And we watched people, we watched moms and dads come in and families come in, and they would walk through and they would go through and they would pick up the product and they'd look at it and then they'd look at the price and they'd put it back. And they would do it over and over and over again. And it's so interesting, like this idea of insights. It's not just like on a consumer level, because we asked people too. We said, hey, like we work for this advertising agency. Notice you picked up this product. Why did you put it back? And they're like, oh, my kids love my kids love that product, but like, we're on a budget for meals. And this is just, it doesn't enable us to like, this is just too expensive to get all the pieces. So we choose this one. And we took that back to the client. We said, hey, we spent a day in a grocery store and we know why. It's a price thing, right? Like we're talking to a certain family in a certain way, but the price is not in line with that. And they didn't believe us. And they're like, no, we've done all the pricing. Like, and I understand a lot more now that I'm on the client side as well, but they're like, no, we've done all the pricing analytics. We've done all the metrics. We know exactly like how much to cost. This is the margin. This is how much we should be pushing the product for. And in the end, we took them to the grocery store and gave them $10 and said, you need to buy a meal for 4. Like go, I think there were like 8 or 9 of them. Yeah. We said like, go buy things, get your sauce and get the pasta and get everything else and bring it back and then check out. And none of the 8 came back with their own sauce in the end because they couldn't actually buy it. They couldn't afford it. They couldn't put the full meal together. And they all came back with like a different kind of the product that they were trying to sell. And so I love coming back to that story because I feel like that's when you feel like you've exhausted qualitative, quantitative, you've researched, you've talked. At the end of the day, like going and observing how people use or don't use your product and what they like, how they actually like feel about it when they see it, I think is so invaluable. And it keeps coming up over and over again. I was really young and it was in a different country, but I keep coming back to that story.
Yeah, I'm jealous because I feel like obviously we're a software company, so we can watch every click and everything. And, that gives us a lot of insights. But I can't like sit behind somebody's back and watch them like click around. Right. And I think, they're getting there with some of the like, there's mouse tracking software and stuff, but it's a little different. What's interesting also about that story is like, you couldn't do that with Hollister, right? At least for a while, like you couldn't, which is like, gotta be really tough.
It definitely made, and again, it definitely made our ability to go back in and leverage some of the tools that we already had in place digitally a lot easier, right? Because going in store visits and product visits and actually like talking to people and watching them try things on and experience what the store is like. That was a hard one to replace.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's go back in your career,
Okay.
right? So we talked about you spent 8 years in advertising.
Yeah.
Talked about some of the learnings there. Then you transitioned to ESPN, and you had a bunch of different really cool jobs at ESPN, right? Whether it was the X Games, you had the whole kind of racing
Yeah.
circuit, NASCAR, IndyCar. You did tennis for a while, then you did fantasy, did the whole digital thing. And I think one of the things that was interesting for me when I looked at your background was you talked a lot about storytelling when it came to ESPN. And the reality is that all of those things, come down to ESPN as a
Yeah.
publisher, right? And ESPN's job is to tell a story and to get people excited and keep them entertained. And obviously, that's the skill set I would imagine that you kind of have pulled with you, right? So when you think about storytelling and some of the lessons that you learned there, like what did you observe? What was it that you've like drawn with you about that kind of skill set?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite things. It's something I think I've always wished I was better and better at. And I guess that's probably like the first, I don't know, first observation or first truth I'd pull out is I like, good storytelling, like really good, compelling storytelling is really hard. Like that's, and I say that because I think it's a rare talent that can conceive, build, and tell a story by themselves, especially in the world of marketing, advertising, brand building. So I guess a core truth about good storytelling is I think it's a team sport, and I feel like good storytelling is a team sport, and I feel like as soon as I realized that, which was again, it was at ESPN, right? Because coming out of the world of advertising, there were copywriters and art directors, and they would build the story and they would give me the story, and then I have to go sell it to a bunch of people that had no part in building the story. It's different these days, right? That was a while ago, but yeah, like at ESPN, finding a way to bring different and disparate streams of creativity and perspective and point of view together into one cohesive narrative always makes for a better story, I think. And so I think that there's a lot of things I can slap that team sport moniker onto, but I think storytelling is maybe at the root of it, right? At ESPN, we worked with amazing agency partners, and those agency partners were always open to letting us be a part of the conversation, which was the first aha moment for me. It was like, oh, I get to be part of this, right? As a client, as a marketer, I get to be part of telling the story. We worked with amazing executive producers, right? People that lived and breathed all these sports. They were on the ground all the time. They knew all the insights, athletes, and ins and outs of the fans. And we worked with some of the best writers in the world. And when it all came together is when it turned into gold. And I think that's like, and that gold was probably like, I don't know if truth number 2, I think in 3, so I might try and pull out a third, but like truth, like truth number 2 is like the best times, the best stories we told immersed people in a world authentically, right? Like, and building stories from your own experience, right? This kind of goes back to the consumer insights. Building stories from your own experience always helps the team. I saw a great quote, and I can't remember where it's from, but it was basically like, when you're in a situation and you feel a certain way, the best stories make someone else feel that same way. And without them being there. And that's an amazing art, right? That's an amazing skill when you can get sounds and smells and a feeling communicated through a piece of work, whether it's a piece of writing or a piece of film. So like what's so interesting is like like we had this when I worked on NASCAR. And have you ever been to a race?
No, but I really want to. I've heard I need to sit in the infield and just breathe it in. You know what I mean? Which I really do want to do. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So like, that's why I asked it. So like the first time when I first started working on motorsports, I was like, this is great. This is super exciting. I get to work on a big sport. It's a big business. It's incredibly exciting.
Yep.
This is going to be great. I'm ready. And everyone was like, no, before you start working on this, you have to go to a race. So let's pick a race, which race you're going to go to, because you really can't work on the sport until you are at a race. And I was like, I've been to sporting events. I love sports. I've been to football and hockey and basketball. But they're not wrong, right? And the first time you get into a race, like there is nothing like being in the infield and the smells and the sounds and the roar of the engines and the flyovers and the people and the noise. And like at Daytona, it's like 200,000+ people in one place experiencing one massive cultural and sporting event. And like the brief for us was tell that story, that full sensory experience, and do it through a marketing campaign, right? Do it through a broadcast and a campaign. And that was the brief we charged ourselves with. We said, how are we going to do this? Like, how do we actually how do you script a story around something that's so emotional and so visceral? And in the end, so we worked with Wyden and Kennedy, they're such an incredibly talented partner of ours. And in the end, we actually ended up working with a documentary film director named Doug Prey. And he kind of, he'd done some amazing work, like profiling subcultures, I guess. And we said, like, NASCAR is a kind of a subculture. Like, you have to, without being there, how do you experience it? And in the end, we went through the traditional process. We built out the brief and the plans and the budget and scripted out some spots. But I think what really unlocked that storytelling is we worked with the director, with the writers, with the agency, with the executive producers of NASCAR. And we just went to Daytona for a week and we filmed everything. We filmed fans and drivers and flyovers and practice and inside the cars and outside the cars. And in the end, it turned into I think, an amazing campaign. I think the line was "Feel Your Heart Race," right? Which is, again, like tapping right into that emotion of the track. But it also turned into a 30-minute documentary that aired on ABC. And it was a completely accidental piece of work, but how we captured it and kind of the rawness of it and the realness of the fans, I thought was like one of those times when really good storytelling was told in a very authentic and truthful way. So,
which is inherently like a super difficult thing. Like, my wife constantly complains about it, but when people will put up, a video on Snapchat or on Instagram or whatever of a concert, you're like, this just doesn't feel like I'm at the concert. You know what I mean? Like, so to be able to replicate that experience is incredibly difficult. Yeah. And as you spoke, the thing I kept thinking about is, there's been a little bit of a phenomenon inside our own company, but then it's happening very, very quickly with Formula One and the kind of Netflix series, which is, I can't even remember the name, Drive to something. Oh, yeah. It doesn't really matter. But it's like it's gotten the entire country, right? That one series has gotten the entire country into being Formula One fans, which is kind of crazy. And I think that as I reflect on it and I think about that show, you get the sights, the sounds, the speed, they do a really good job of making you feel it, right? Making you feel that emotion as if you were there on the track, as if you were the driver, as if you were, one of the pit crew or whatever. Yep. And I've never heard anybody describe it that way, but it makes so much sense. Like, as you say,
the thing I think that, it's so interesting about like the Formula One show or was it HBO's like 24/7, right? Like, or like where they go in and document the NFL teams, Hard Knocks. Yeah. Like, what's so amazing is, like, going back to, again, casting my memory back, going back to ESPN, like, what's so interesting is, like, there's just and I think it's inherently built into good storytelling, right? So you have like this, it's a team sport. You have to be authentic and genuine and really communicate like a feeling, but it's also, that was a super common practice, was like, for a sport that people maybe don't get into, or like Formula One as an example, or a game that might not be of interest, it always, like, even though it sounds a little, I think, I don't know, maybe not obvious on the surface, but like storytelling also plays such a huge part in that. So when the reason you see a profile of that offensive lineman who came up through college, was at a D3 school, and then was a walk-on, and now he's starting for the first time for insert team that maybe doesn't drive a lot of ratings. It's the same exact thing, right? It's like, let's communicate a story, a feeling, get a vested interest, so that all of a sudden I want to watch that. I want to watch that game. I want to watch that player. I want to watch number 79. Even though 30 minutes ago I didn't know that person was playing football. I think it all kind of comes back to that same thing of communicating a point of view and an emotion, and trying to get a full sensory experience across that matters. That's authentic.
Yeah, 100%. So then, post ESPN, you go to Nike. which is kind of the mothership of sports, at least when it comes to kind of, brands. Um, and I'd be really interested to hear your kind of observations on like entering that organization. And you got a ton of different experiences there, but it's got to be fascinating to be at what is one of the most, call it top 10 most recognizable brands in the world. Um, what do you think it is that's given it its longevity, right? Like what are the core elements for them from a brand building perspective that you think have allowed that to be so sustainable, right? What do they get right? Like why? And it's just, there's an emotion, right, tied to it, right? But what is it about them that they really get right and they do really well?
Yeah, such a good question. I think, and I'll try to make this not sound like a giveaway answer, because I think there's actually like a really interesting nuance that makes it so unique to that place. But you can't answer that question without starting with the people. Like they simply hire the smartest, sharpest, most innovative kind of strategic thinkers, and they're everywhere. It's not, oh well, let's go talk to that group because they're the futurists. No, it's everywhere. But I think that so that's the expected answer. Sure, it's like the people are amazing, and they are. I think what's such an interesting nuance.
No, but that's a real thing, right? That's a real thing. Like we see that.
Yeah.
We see that. I've seen that in the software industry, and you see it in like we were really big in beauty at first, but like, there's like L'Oreal is considered like a finishing school, right? You go there, and because you've gone there, you now have the cachet to go and get any job you want, right? And so then what that does is it kind of, and the reason for that is the people there are generally very, very good. And so that kind of reinforces itself over time, where because the people are so good at the beginning, it allows you to recruit better and better people over time, which then that is what becomes the actual attraction, right? Anyways, keep going. But so it's not a cop-out answer at all. It's 100% a real thing. It's hard to do it, but it's 100% a real thing.
Well, so it's like, I think that's such a great setup, right? It's such a hard thing to do, but I think going back to your question, right? I think what makes it so unique at Nike is that somehow, all these very talented people come because of the attraction of the brand, because of the innovation, because of how it's run. There's a long history there, which I think is part of it. But then somehow they all check their egos at the door. So you have these like incredible, talented people come in, and then they all somehow find a way that every conversation, every iteration, every collaboration makes these ideas better. Like I think one of the most remarkable things about my time there is, I would say, without much hyperbole, there was no finished product, right? Like whether that's a product or an idea or a film or an event that wasn't better than the initial idea. And I think like I think about the amount of work that goes through a company that big, a brand that big, that many people touching it. Almost everything was better when it ended than when it started. And I think that's like, there's a magic to not only bringing these amazing people together that are all amazing in their own right? They're all amazing on their own. If they all started their own company, they would be very, very talented and successful. Then you put them all together, and then somehow the magic of the company or the magic of the brand makes them able to build on each other, until the end result is always better than the input. And I think like, that's probably the first thing when you ask like, what do they get right? There's a formula there. And I think it's like I don't know, I'll call it a self segue into the next thing. Right. But like, I think it's because the brand is, and you said this, right? Like the brand is bigger than any one person. And I think, when you're built on such a clear and consistent purpose, and you really believe that you go into the office every day. I certainly did. I don't want to speak on behalf of other people. You really believe you go into the office every day, and that day is an opportunity to potentially do something that is great or impactful or first. And you kind of, and there's a formula there, right? That works with the first point. Get a bunch of talented people, understand that the brand is bigger than the individual, and then they work together to make great things. And then everyone holds those great things up together, and then they go and do it again. And I think that's, where that started. I think you can go anywhere back. You can go back to the beginnings, the origins, and Shoe Dog. I heard you bring that up in a couple interviews, or the origins of Just Do It. But like, I think at the end of the day, like, brand marketing is in their DNA, and I think like that idea of maybe the third. Thinking threes. I don't know what it is. I'll dig into that.
Yeah, I tend to do the same.
I'll dig into that someday. Two feels
people thinking threes, so it's good to communicate threes.
Like
too.
two feels short, four feels long. But I think it's that, like, that brand marketing being in their DNA is because marketing is important. Advertising is important, but brand is everything. And brand is holistic, and I think that's how it's it's like a summary of everything a consumer touches, right? It's the product, the experience, the stores, the content, the copy, the history, and I think Nike understands that better than most, right? Like the maybe that's a part of the secret sauce that everyone at Nike works on brand, and you're building and kind of elevating a fairly sacred thing, right? It's like building brand is a team sport too. And I think that's at the end of the day, it all comes down to that. Like, it's you're all working for a greater good at the end of the day, bigger than you, bigger than us.
Yeah, no, I mean, it reminds me a lot of, so LVMH, which is Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy, right? Collection of luxury brands. You know it, but some of the listeners might not. When I ask them, like, what is it that's made them so successful? Because he's now, I think, the richest person or one of the richest people in the world. Obviously, their collective brands have done really well, and like they think incredibly long term, and they think very brand first, right? So it's what does this brand look like in 100 years? What does it look like in 50 years? And I think there's a certain expectation of Nike that, like, we're building something that's going to be around for another 100 years, and that's the expectation. And that totally changes the way that you think about marketing, product, all the things that you talked about, right? Because, you can do all kinds of things that help yourself in the short run, hit your numbers this quarter, or, show a little bit more profitability, or, drive direct revenue that can be tracked or whatever it is. But when you think with that kind of long-term lens, and you think broader than just, this quarter, it can be super powerful, right? But very hard to instill. Yeah. But once you get there, it's really
and then strength builds on strength, right? I think that's a part of it, and I think it's that belief too, right? I think it's probably the same at a lot of these companies that you speak with or interview. Like, when you walk in every day and you believe that that's kind of what you're working for, like you believe that you're like pushing something that might be valuable in 25 years or 50 years. That definitely is like, I'm not just putting bricks. I'm not just like laying bricks, right? I'm actually like building a cathedral, and I think there's a big difference between like, I'm laying bricks, and that's okay. That's great. I love doing this. And then doing that with a vision in mind of like, and what I'm building might not finish like, for 20 years. But I'm a part of it. And I think there's an ethos to that too.
Yeah, I just started a really good book series. It's actually centered around, it's a Ken Follett series called what's the name of it? But it's about a cathedral builder, and like he had done like spy stuff and whatever beforehand. And his publishing house was like, I think this is a bad idea. Nobody wants to read a book about like building a cathedral. But then it was by far his most successful book, and it it's done. It's got great longevity, and it's just like weird when you think about like, hey, I'm going to dedicate like a big portion of my life to something that's going to last for a really long time. Right. So let's talk about the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Which is not necessarily the opposite, but just different. You spent a lot of time on brands that are tied to individuals, whether that was the Kobe brand, the LeBron brand, right? You've got this new brand that you've launched with Charli D'Amelio, Social Tourist. So what is it about those brands? Like how are things different for them, right? Like how do you think about marketing a brand that is so closely tied to an individual kind of persona? What are the core elements there? How is it different?
It's interesting. I almost start that question with the foundation of how not the same, but it's almost like I'll promise I'll come back to that too. But like, I almost feel like
Yeah.
it almost puts a sharp focus on like these, I don't know, core tenets or core lessons that have come out of working on something that's like, we used to say like working with an athlete like that is like flying close to the sun.
Yeah.
You know, like everything is under intense pressure, intense scrutiny. Everything that is done is magnified. And I think a lot of that
because it's a reflection on them as well, right? It goes in both directions. Like
right.
They're a reflection on the brand, but anything that you do, they're looking at really closely, right? Like they're writing the thing.
Well, and it's funny because I think like the first thing, and it's almost like answer both at the same time. I think the first one is like you are building something around an individual, but it's the expression of the individual, like we just talked about, that is almost becomes magnified in its importance, right? So at the end of the day, it's about the product, and I think I've heard other folks that you've talked to speak of this, but like when you're working with an athlete and their livelihood is tied up in the product, and their personal stories are tied up in the product, like you're expressing personal stories from where they grew up, the high school they went to, what their favorite cereal is, family members. That obsession with products takes on, that's one of the biggest lessons and takeaways for me coming just out of that era. And again, I had an amazing opportunity to work with super talented people, and really amazing products. And I just tried to learn as much as I could from the experience. But that's the first one, is like, and it's not just obsessing the product. I mean, it's like really getting into it. I had this great moment early in my days at Nike, which again, it's these little things, right? Like 8 months can go by in a blur, or you can do a 10-day workshop, and then you remember that one thing for 15 years. This is one of those things, and I remember sitting at my desk very clearly, early days, working on a deck late night, I don't know, trying to build the next big idea. And one of the GMs came by, and they had this amazing shoe in their hand, and they put it on my desk, and they said, "Do you know what this is?" And I was like, "Oh no, I don't know." And they were like, "Tell me why this is amazing." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I can do this. Like, looks like it has this big airbag, and the color's amazing. I love the color palette. And I see you put," and that was literally as far as I got. And he was like, "Cool." He's like, "I'm gonna come back in 2 weeks, and I'm gonna bring different products, and I'm gonna ask you why this product is amazing. And I think your answer should be more in depth." And it wasn't done in a mean way at all. It was done in a way that was like, how are you going to tell a story about this product unless you know how it's built, unless you know why the pieces were put into place, and why, and I think this is why I take this one story away into everything I've done since, unless you know why the laces are constructed that way, or why the outsole was put on that way, or what the pattern on the side means. And I think that was like such an unlock for me around, again, working with athletes where you're creating a physical expression of who they are. But just in general, like really, it's one thing to say, I know the product, and it's another one. And I spent, the next 2 weeks with product line managers and material experts, down in the innovation kitchen where they test everything. And I'm not going to say I took 2 weeks off of doing marketing, but I just took 2 weeks off, and I just walked around campus, and I was like, why do you do that? Why did you build it that way? How much air is in there? Is that good? Where did it come from? Who can I talk to about why you did that? And it was a huge unlock for me. So I think that's one thing that it's not different than I think what everyone should be doing when you really love what you do and love the product and want to be able to communicate that. Again, authentic storytelling. When you want to be able to tell the story of why that product exists to a consumer, you should be able to build it, or try or fumble around and get close. And it's just amplified when you're working with these.
Well, because those things stick around, right? And they're how things spread. Like, and it really does come down to, like, it's funny. Like, I literally, I just bought a pair of shoes. And what's funny is I'd actually asked for a different pair of shoes, and they brought out the wrong box. And I looked at them. I was like, "Oh, those are kind of sweet. Like, I kind of like those." And I asked him, I was like, "So what are these shoes?" And they're like, "Oh, this is, oh my God, why can't I think of his name right now?" famous tennis star on shoes. On. What's his name?
Federer.
Yeah. Federer, right? I go, this is Federer's brand. And yeah, he just got really invested in the product. He said he wanted to create a product that was like walking on clouds, right? And I still remember that phrase. And that was something that you have 10 seconds, right? You have like one sentence, 2 sentences for that person to describe that product to me in a way that helps me sell it or helps me connect with it emotionally. And then, I've had like several people comment like, oh, I really like those shoes. I'm like, oh yeah, it's Roger Federer's brand. He said he wanted people to feel like they're walking on clouds. They're really comfortable. I like them. And they're like, they look all right. And so, unless you like understand it right at that level, I think it's really hard to make that connection. Right. Well,
and it's,
and I think your point on sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Sorry, I interrupted.
I was going to say what's really interesting about the product side of things that you mentioned is we see that really consistently in both directions, where you see somebody that like decides to launch a brand, they slap their name on it or some logo they came up with it, and they're the face of the brand, and they don't really give a shit, and they're just like there to collect their royalty check or get a pay, be the sponsored athlete or be the sponsored whatever. But the brands that it truly succeeds in are ones where the individual is deeply interested in that industry, that product, that category. Like in your case, right? Like how much more could you be interested in something than you're a basketball player and what shoes are you wearing, right? Like what else is there? That's it, right? Like that's the most important thing. Where they're deeply interested in the category and then deeply involved in the product creation process, right? And so, yeah, it's just really cool to hear that. It's consistent with what we see.
And it's I think it's interesting. We talked a little bit earlier, like that. What's that secret sauce to, right? Because it's one thing to be obsessive with product. You have there's a lot of amazing athletes out there, right? I think one of it's almost like that next big pillar, or like what made it different. I guess was part of your question. Well, again, kind of comes back to an earlier topic, but it's almost the next level of it, right? Like the best products, like the ones that are consistently like lauded by consumers, the ones that sell out the fastest, the ones that are ranked as the top sneakers of the last decade for this particular person or this particular line, like they all have a personal connection, or most of them have this personal connection that almost bears a little bit of the athlete's soul to the world, or it's like built on such a deep insight coming out of the personality of the person. So yes, there's like innovation that's built for a certain style of play or a certain way of navigating through a game. But like you look back at like the LeBron 8 South Beach is probably one of the best LeBrons ever made. And it was, I think 2010, and it's the year he went to Miami. And it was all based on, this incredibly dramatic moment in sports where LeBron went to Miami, and that was a colorway of the shoe, and it was based on Miami Nights. Or like the Kobe 5 Bruce Lee, which I only remember that because it's a shoe I never got and I don't have. That drawing that connection of just authentic, like right into the person. Like Kobe was a master of his craft. Like someone he was really inspired by was Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee wore a yellow jumpsuit in Enter the Dragon. And so there was a Kobe 5 Bruce Lee that was yellow, like the color of the jumpsuit. And it's just like that depth of storytelling. And, I think you hear things like that on the surface, and like, that's crazy. That's so deep. That's what resonates to consumers, Another pair of shoes I don't have, like the AJ1 shattered backboard. It's because Michael Jordan played a game in Trieste, Italy, in 1985, and he was wearing his first signature shoe. I hope I get these details right. And he was wearing like orange, black, and white, and he put 30 points on the board or 35 points on the board, and one of those buckets was he shattered the backboard, and now it's a grail. Like that story is. However many decades and decades old. But I just find like there's so many interesting lessons in that, right? Like obsessing the product, not like I know it, like I could build it, and therefore I can tell you why it's so amazing, and then
I
and
like
threading
that.
these authentic.
I can build it. Like I could build it. I know if we had to recreate this, I
I
could do
could
it if I
try.
had to.
Yeah,
Right?
I
Like
could try.
yeah.
And then wrapping that in like, I don't know, like this cultural relevancy. There's a lot of magic there that obviously happens in sneakers, and it happens when you have so many talented people building products and stories and athletes and everything else. But like, again, I take those and I look and I find those applicable almost everywhere. When you sit there and you go, I'm working in X industry and we make a thing. Why does my consumer need that thing? I'm going to go watch them, and then I'm going to obsess the thing and figure out how to bring the two together. And then I'm going to tell an authentic story about how it was made or why it's that color. Or so I think there's so much power coming out of working with, with and around athletes like that, because they're the catalyst for, at least they were the catalyst for a lot of that stuff.
Well, let's talk about, social tourists specifically. So this is a big launch. It happened, I believe, was it May, or when was the exact launch?
Yeah, it happened in May this year.
Yeah. So talk to me about kind of what it was like to work with Charli. Obviously, Charli D'Amelio is one of the largest TikTokers, if not the largest TikToker in the world at this point. How did that process work out? How did you start working with her in the first place? What has been her involvement in the product creation process? Has she helped to recruit other influencers to work with you guys? Tell me the whole story.
Sure. So I think the story starts with my team, because they had cracked this open right. I mean, right as I was starting, they were cracking this open. So COVID hits. Big businesses, right, that are driving a lot of revenue through stores are pivoting, right? Our businesses are trying to pivot. And one of the big pivots was,
Yep.
how are we going to move significant volume to our digital channels? The team
Yep.
and the team already had in place great influencer marketing strategies. They had great digital marketing, DTC strategies, traffic, revenue, full funnel, the whole thing. But that was a big shift, especially for a brand like Hollister. I mean, a lot of revenue tied up in what are we going to do now? That question. And they pitched, hey, we should go and work with Charli and Dixie D'Amelio through the lens of an influencer marketing, right? So they can help us drive back to school and holiday. We can create content with them. That was kind of that pitch was like sitting on the table right when I started. So you got to give a big shout to them. And the truth is, like, that was it was an ingenious move by the collective. They came in, we did content creation, we did the whole photo shoot with them for just our regular Hollister work. We did a TikTok challenge at the time that had 5 billion plus views. It was one of the biggest challenges at the time. Had like 1.2 million videos created, and it was all built on the strength of their personality, their reach, their energy and their appeal. And it went a huge way to making 2020 into a successful year for the brand. And as all that was happening, we were having this conversation in the background, like, they're incredible, right? And it's not just a very, like, it's definitely it's Charli and Dixie are amazing, but their whole family, Mark and Heidi, the D'Amelio family, the whole group, are just, I can't find enough good things to say about the collective. Like, it's been a pleasure from day one to work with them. And so as we were landing this, we said, what if we signed a long-term partnership with the family? And we created it. If we're going to create a brand, what would that look like? And what would it be based on? And how would we work together? And what role would we all play? And it was new. It was new for that family at the time, for sure. New for Abercrombie at the time. And it ended up being like, we had initial conversations about it, and there was a shared purpose around, just building up and bringing positivity to the world and building connections, building community. Really supporting that generation that they are a part of. That was like a big part of the brand building process, was like, okay, we share values. Like, that's a really important, like, all of our brands right now are purpose driven. And sharing values was almost like, okay, good, we share values. The second thing was like, can we do this? Can we build a Gen Z brand by Gen Z? And what does that look like? Like, what does a Gen Z brand built for Gen Z look like? So that was an interesting building block. Let me say, can we build an inherently social brand? And then, this really interesting conversation of like, aren't all brands social? Social is like, I mean, everybody's social, right? Like everybody's social. Now everybody's like metaverse. Now everybody's like digitally socialized in a cryptocurrency. And we were like, well, how do we make that? We kind of have a unique way in on building a social first brand. Like we have this incredibly social family that kind of came up through that, like they're living that experience every day. So how do we build a social first brand that might like set us apart when it comes to like how we market, how we build things, how we interact with the family. And so we started building all these bits and pieces, and it just came together incredibly well. And so we worked on the brand and the product and the rest of the line for probably 5 or 6 months, building out the infrastructure online, building out the experience, building out the app and the digital UX as part of the Hollister ecosystem, because it's so big. I was kind of a catalyst of a slingshot to really throw it into the mainstream and the universe. And then now we're 6 months in, and we're moving and optimizing as we go. Charli and Dixie, the whole family they have an amazing eye for product and for trends. They're evolving so fast, and we're working with the brand to evolve the brand as they do. And it's opened up all kinds of doors. It's opened up amazing doors. I think one of the, we ended up doing a live TikTok fashion show on Charli's page, which on her TikTok channel. And it had 1.2, 1.3 million uniques. I think at the time it was the largest live ever, although hard time confirming that. And it was, like we brought this product collection. It was the second drop with Charli and Dixie, and they brought their friends to the show. And then it was filmed in LA, and it was shoppable. So we worked with TikTok to use kind of like brand new technology to make the fashion show shoppable as consumers were coming in and experiencing it. And it was entertainment, and it was product, and it was commerce, and it was live, and it was on Charli's TikTok. And those are the kind of doors that were opened, by working with such an amazing group that has such reach. And we kind of feel like that's only the beginning. That's the beginning of like building an inherently social brand that can do new things, that can open new doors. So we think we're really onto something. It's just a super compelling proposition right now.
Well, I mean, I think you're uniquely positioned to help them do that, right? Which is pretty cool, just given your, the experience you've had, right, in these kind of individually led brands. Well, I really appreciate you taking out the time today. I thought it was fascinating. I learned way more than I thought I would, and I know that I think you brought a really unique perspective, and I don't know, it's just really cool. I'm so glad we got connected through Steve. So I'm gonna have to send him some odd collectible that I'm sure he'll like, and then but really appreciate taking up the time, and excited to see you in the new year. Hopefully we can get together face to face if this thing doesn't prevent us.
100%. I'm there for it. I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the questions and the conversation.
Of course. All right. Bye, Robert.
Hit subscribe now. Earned by Tribe Dynamics. Tribe Dynamics unlocks your social media influencer community. Our platform not only tracks and measures your best influencer relationships, but discovers new influencers to grow your business through earned media. Get started with a demo today at tribedynamics.com. tribedynamics.com.